Yorkshire, a land of lonely moors and rolling hills, where man and nature have combined to make full use of the treasures of the earth. This is the country of broad acres, where the fields are large and unrestricted by hedges. For generations, the farmers of Yorkshire have tilled the rich soil and prospered. But their success is not only measured by the fertility of the land, but by their forthright characters and love of hard work, which has done much to ensure fruitful harvests throughout the years. But as every land worker knows, the fresh air gives a keen edge to the appetite, and they welcome an opportunity to enjoy a respite from their toils. Beyond, wide stretches of countryside meet our gaze, and there is much beauty to be admired. Although the north may be more rugged and expansive than the south, it has a distinct charm of its own, offering well-varied vistas. Yorkshire boasts of many rivers, some large and important outlets from the industrial areas, while others are mere streams flowing peacefully towards the sea, and yet they all have an individual charm and fit neatly into the landscape. Other attractions are the numerous waterfalls which decorate the wooded glades. The history of this country is almost as old as the hills themselves, and in days gone by, man had to defend himself against many invaders. The Wars of the Roses ravaged these parts, but that was long ago, and that war left the countryside unscarred, the people having long since returned to their farms. In the valleys, villages have sprung up, and the way of life continues at a more even tenor. But the Yorkshireman has not lagged behind in modern developments. He has sought the rich coal and iron veins and founded industries. He has developed cities which have become the backbone of our trade. Leeds, for example, is one of the largest in the kingdom. With a population of 500,000, Leeds has built up many flourishing trades thanks to the nearby coalfields. Many large engineering works turn out heavy machinery and also much agricultural equipment for the surrounding farming districts. Leather, pottery, furniture and woolen goods are but a few of the trades which keep the city busy. The wide streets and bustling crowds bear evidence of prosperity, and perhaps Leeds owes at least some of its success to the fact that it is situated midway between London and Scotland. But the cultural side of life has not been overlooked, and the city has a fine university which has become a famous seat of learning. Leaving the hustle of town life behind, we return once more to the countryside and wander over the vast moors. Less friendly and more desolate perhaps than those of Devon, yet they have a dignity and a glory of their own. Such scenes as this have often been used as backgrounds by novelists, and amongst the most memorable are Bronte's dramatic books Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. Climbing to a heath-clad tableland 1,000 feet above the sea, we come across the Brimham Rocks, a fantastic showground which only nature could provide to break the monotony of the moorland scene. Here, scattered over 50 acres, are a collection of huge boulders, most of which are weird shapes as if carved by some mad sculptor to represent monsters from another world. Each rock has been given some fanciful name, as the Serpent's Head or the Druid's Coffin. Geologists claim that they have stood here for thousands of years and that the keen blasts from the Atlantic across the unprotected moors have chiseled the soft rock into these fantastic shapes. Others believe that they are the remains of a Druid temple, but as most of these stones weigh as much as 30 tons, this theory seems to be based more on fancy than on fact, although it is quite possible that the enterprising Druids made use of them for their ceremonies in days gone by. Back on the moors, we reflect on the many moods of nature and wonder at her variations. For even in our small island home, she can provide enough scenic changes for a lifetime, and the Yorkshire scene is surely one of the best. But the beauties of nature are not the only attractions, and there are many interesting historic relics to remind us of the grim events of yesterday. Across the Durham border stands the remains of Barnard Castle, which was built nearly 800 years ago and is said to have been a fortress in many civil wars, while in more recent years it has become associated with Charles Dickens. On the edge of the forest of Knaresborough is Harrogate, a pleasant country Yorkshire town which, due to its reputation for saline springs, has become the chief inland watering place and health resort of the north. The royal baths were erected a mere 50 years ago, but the springs have been in use since the 16th century and are said to be cures for bronchitis, gout, and numerous other diseases. It is claimed that the waters are equal to those of the continental spas, and many seekers of health flock to Harrogate to take the waters. Harrogate was originally two tiny hamlets, and the springs, it is said, were used by King John. Soon the news of the beneficial waters was spread abroad, and the fields which once separated the two villages became the main thoroughfares and thus became one town. Today, the fine, wide streets are flanked by solid buildings which are characteristic of the town's well-being, while the many open spaces and squares add to the dignified atmosphere. But the town is alive to modern ideas, and here and there new buildings creep in, blending in time with the old. With other things to see, we wander on to Nidderdale and follow the path of the Nid as it flows through wooded glens. This river is quite small, but nonetheless charming, and provides many pleasant views. This part of the country is sometimes referred to as the Switzerland of England. To our mind, the resemblance is a little exaggerated, and even if there is any similarity, we prefer to regard it as a typical bit of old Yorkshire. The Nid runs through Knaresborough itself, a market town of old world charm and interest. Many of its houses were built from the timber from the castle, which, after figuring in many struggles, was dismantled 200 years ago. It was here that the knights fled after murdering Thomas à Becket and hid for more than a year. But the town has less bloodthirsty historic relics, for here is what is reputed to be the oldest chemist shop in the country, and it is perhaps consoling to reflect that our ancestors had their own headaches even in such pleasant surroundings as these. "20 miles on, we reach York, a city of quiet dignity where the past lives again before our eyes. The history of York is more complete than that of any other town in England, and everything has been done to retain the old world atmosphere. During the Roman occupation, the city was a heavily fortified camp. These walls mark the outline of the encampment, and records show that the walls were kept up by the Saxons for many years. In medieval days, entrance to the city was gained by 5 bars, most of which have survived the years and give a good idea of the extent of the original city. The western gateway is marked by the stately Bootham Bar, with its fine old Norman archway, while these stone figures stand as symbols of the hectic days in the history of the city. The Micklegate Bar is perhaps one of the most interesting of these archways. On this bar, the heads of traitors were hung, a gruesome custom which fortunately died out at the end of the Jacobite rebellion. The sleepy River Ouse that flows slowly through the centre of the city was once a busy waterway carrying goods to towns along its 60-mile course. Today, the railways have superseded river transport, and the Ouse is now more picturesque than useful. The fine old stone buildings which line the banks give the scene a Venetian atmosphere and provide many pleasing vistas. The old water tower at the foot of Lendall Bridge blends into the peaceful river scene. From across the water, we get a fine view of the Guild Hall, which was erected 500 years ago. In the Middle Ages, the Lord Mayor of York was treated like a king and attended by liveried servants. The city still retains its historic form of government, but most of the stately ceremonies once performed are buried in the past. But perhaps the pearl of York's treasures is the Minster. With its two massive towers 200 feet high, it is a monument to its builders who created something symbolizing majestic beauty and dignity. The present building was started in the 13th century and took nearly 300 years to complete. During the 19th century, it was twice ravaged by fire, but in spite of these catastrophes, the fabric still remains. Its lines of classic grace present a wealth of detail, while its immense size is almost breathtaking. It is little wonder that the Minster should be counted as one of the world's finest buildings. The west front is a picture of matchless grandeur. Dipping deeper into the treasure chest of relics of the past, we come to Clifford's Tower, standing on a mound. Built during the civil wars by Francis Clifford, Earl of Cumberland, it now stands almost deserted, visited only by sightseers. For a more peaceful atmosphere, we retrace our steps to the Treasurer's house, from which the Treasury and all persons associated with the Minster were controlled in bygone days. No matter which way we turn, there is always a scene of old-world charm to meet our gaze, and in such surroundings it is not difficult to imagine the pages of history being turned back and finding ourselves in the age of cobbled streets and crinolines. Thanks to the enterprise of Dr. Kirk, an exact life-size replica of a street in York 200 years ago has been built in the Castle Museum. The old dress shop and apothecary has been reproduced in faithful detail, and it does not require much imagination to picture the characters back to life and moving around with all the leisurely gait of the 18th century. But Stonegate has changed little since those days and blends with the mellow surroundings, while from every angle the Minster rises before us as a mighty edifice. Leaving York, we make our way across country and on to the rugged coast, where the rollers lash the rocks along the shore. For generations, the history of Yorkshiremen has been linked with the sea, and from her shores have sailed many intrepid mariners. Further north, we reach Whitby, a peaceful little fishing town situated on both sides of the River Esk. The picturesque red-tiled fishermen's cottages line the narrow streets, which during the herring season bustle with activity. It was during the 17th century that the town prospered, for in those days it was an important shipbuilding centre, and it is said that the famous Captain Cook made his first adventurous voyage round the world in a sturdy vessel from the Whitby yards. High up on the cliff, stand the remains of the Abbey, a fine example of Gothic architecture, and there is little doubt that in the early days Whitby owed much of its fame and fortune to the presence of the Abbey. Records show that there have been several abbeys on the site, the first being built about 1300 years ago. It was the chief place of learning in the north of England. The abbey and town were destroyed by the Danes and lay desolate for many years before being refounded under the Normans. The original building was much further away from the sea, and the rapid erosion of the coast has put the safety of these ruins in danger. And at this point, our tour ends, leaving us with pleasant memories of historic Yorkshire and her broad acres.